alternatives. So this consultation is hosted by Migration, Youth and Children Platform in partnership with UNICEF, UNHCR, the International Detention Coalition, and the United Nations Network on Migration. My name is Gabriela, and I'm one of the MYCP's co-specialists on alternatives to detention. Today, we have young people, governments, civil society, private sector, and local and regional government attendees from across the world to discuss how we can promote the rights, welfare, and liberty of young migrants and refugees on the move. So thank you so much for being here and for taking part. I want to start with a quick safeguarding note. Please note that the safeguarding focal point for today is Aryan from MYCP, and that anyone aged under the age of 18 should keep their cameras off at all times. Also, please, everyone, keep your microphones off if you're not speaking, but you're more than welcome to keep your cameras on. Lastly, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, saying where you're from and the organization you represent. To kick off the opening sessions of today's consultation, I am very pleased to invite Laura Blanco Arango, representative of the Colombian government, to speak. Laura, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gabriela, and good afternoon, colleagues. I'm Laura Arango. I work at the Permanent Mission of Colombia here in Geneva. I am very happy to be here and to see that there are so many people connected, some member states, also international organizations and non-governmental organizations. And I would like also to extend special thanks to the Migration, Youth and Children Platform, MYCP, UNICEF, the International Detention Coalition, UNHCR, and the UN, and also the UN Network on Migration and others. I would like to take this opportunity to highlight the commitment of youth. There is no doubt that children and youth are leading a very important role in a very difficult moment, and you are helping us to transform our societies. So I really want to thank all of you. This initiative demonstrates that your voices are essential to advance towards a more human, just and sustainable approach to migration, and in this moment is really necessary. I wanted to also share with you that as chairs of the Global Forum on Migration and Development, together with Ambassador Gustavo Gallon, we were invited to last week to participate in a thematic workshop in Tunisia about diasporas and development. Maybe you know, maybe you don't, that for Colombia, migration is a very important topic because we have been one of the main countries of origin of migrants and refugees, then also a country of transit, and then now we are one of the main countries of destination. We are among 5 main hosting countries. And I'm telling you about the workshop because during the workshop we were able also to talk about our commitment with migration, about the promotion of integration, protection, and non-criminalization of migrants. And during the event, we also had the opportunity to talk and speak about alternatives to detention. You will ask why. And the reason is that in 2022, Colombia made a pledge during the International Migration Review Forum, where we committed to lead the path toward ending immigration detention, especially for children and adolescents. 3 years have passed since that commitment, and unfortunately, the situation worldwide is not getting better. That is why I truly believe that today's meeting gives us the opportunity to come together to discuss about a deeply human cause, to advance toward a world in which migration does not mean losing one's freedom, and where migrant children and youth are protected with dignity, without exception. Colombia has taken on this commitment with responsibility, with compassion, and with determination. During these 3 years, we have been co-conveners of the Second Global Refugee Forum, where we mirrored the pledge that we did during the IMRF. We continue to be a GCM champion, and now we are chairing the GFMD. Together with UNHCR, UNICEF, IOM, and the International Detention Coalition, thank you very much, Carolina Gottardo, he's also online. We have been actively engaged in different events here in Geneva, but also in Chile during the consultations. And also last year, we had the opportunity to visit Zimbabwe, where we were sharing our experience and we were inviting different countries to take a deeper look into their migration approach. This was very successful. Carolina maybe can tell us a little bit about it later. But I want to tell you that we are proud to say that our migration policy has become a state policy. And despite significant challenges, our response has been clear: an open-door migration policy grounded in human rights, inclusion, and solidarity without resorting to the criminalization of human mobility. For Colombia, immigration detention is not an option. There is no humane way to detain a child, nor to separate families migrating in search of protection, opportunity, or dignity. I have repeated this a couple of times, but I feel also very proud to say that since 2018, Colombia has welcomed nearly 3 million migrants, and our response was to implement one of the world's most comprehensive and inclusive regularization processes. The policy that I just mentioned became a state policy guaranteeing access to essential rights such as health, education, work, and social security. And this decision was made even in a very adverse context, when we didn't have any diplomatic or consular relations with our neighbor, and when our borders were closed for nearly 3 years. We cannot forget that we also had a lot of people crossing the Darien Gap. And even then, we never resorted to immediate immigration detention. This model on large-scale regularization and socioeconomic integration and respect for human dignity has been internationally recognized as a replicable good practice. It proves that migration can be managed legally, humanly, and effectively. Before closing my opening remarks, I would like to remind you that Colombia will be hosting the 15th version of the Global Forum on Migration and Development that will take place in Riohacha from the 2nd to the 4th of September. And for this GFMD edition, Colombia has placed regular migration, labor, mobility, and human rights at the heart of its agenda as pillars of well-being and sustainable development. And of course, children and youth are a very important part of this agenda. We invite all the countries and all the stakeholders here today to join us in this collective effort to build a migration policy with a human face, one that prioritizes protection over punishment, integration over exclusion, and care over confinement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura, so much for being here and for that important intervention. It is great to hear about Colombia's positive work on ending immigration detention, and we look forward to discussing progress further at this year's upcoming GFMD. I'd like to now pass the floor to Melanie Teff from UNICEF, please.
Thank you so much. I'm Melanie Teff from UNICEF's Global Migration and Displacement Hub. I want to thank MYCP for organizing this important event, and also for the ongoing commitment to this issue of immigration, of ending child immigration detention. The reason that this issue is so important for UNICEF is the evidence of impacts of detention on a child's physical, emotional, and psychological health, well-being, and development. And we've seen in numerous studies that have shown that detention harms children, regardless of the conditions in which they're held, and that this damage can occur even if the detention is relatively short, and even if it's in supposedly child-friendly facilities. And for children with their families, there's a lot of evidence of the damage that detention causes to parents' ability to effectively parent in detention settings, and the impact that that has on children. The international legal position on this is clear. The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child has clarified that detention of children for immigration-related purposes, whether they're alone or with their families, is never in their best interests, is a violation of child rights, and should not be used even as a measure of last resort. Despite this, immigration of detention of children is sadly still a major issue. In 2019, the Global Study on Children Deprived of Liberty found that at least 80 states detain at least 330,000 children in immigration detention each year. But that's likely to be an underestimate because of the difficulty in obtaining accurate data. And one of the reasons it's hard to calculate this and to get the data is that places of immigration detention are often labeled as something else, often in the guise of protection for children. So they may be given the name of a transit center or a reception center or a child protection or even a tender age shelter. But if children are placed in a setting in which they're deprived of their liberty for reasons related to their migration status, then it's immigration detention regardless of the name. It's really good to see the regional approach taken in this consultation. That's important as there are region-specific dynamics to take into account when working on strategies towards ending child immigration detention. For example, while there are several countries that are making positive pledges and taking steps towards ending child immigration detention in different regions of the world, it's in Latin America that we find many of the models for receiving refugees and migrants without resorting to detention. And we just heard from Laura the important example of Colombia. There are particular issues to consider in Europe with the EU Pact on Migration and Asylum due to come into operation in the middle of next year, which could involve the risk of an increase in the use of immigration detention or detention-like facilities. So this is an important time to be working on ensuring that alternatives are going to be available. And across the wide range of different settings in different regions of Africa, UNICEF has worked with several governments that have successfully implemented community-based care models, providing safe and supportive environments for children and families. But there have also been setbacks, sometimes due to lack of resources for implementing alternatives and occasional policy reversals. Around the world, UNICEF has found that youth organizations play a crucial role in raising awareness about the rights of children on the move and advocating for policy changes, such as ending child immigration detention. Youth-led initiatives such as the Uganda Refugee Resilience Initiative provide peer support and mentorship to refugee and migrant children, helping them navigate their new environments. And this consultation is going to be important in providing momentum for this work, gathering in the information and helping us all take this work forward. So thank you very much. And I pass back to Gabriela.
Thank you so much, Melanie. And now to talk about the situation of child and young refugees, I'd like to welcome Sam Boutruche from UNHCR, who will also be representing the co-leads of the UN Network on Alternatives to Detention workstream.
Thanks a lot for having me, for having UNHCR. It's really a pleasure. So yeah, special thanks to MYCP. This is the second global youth consultation. So I think a very good precedent was established already last year. We're very happy to be part of the second edition. Also, special thanks to UNICEF, IDC, and the network, who've been really instrumental partners in this endeavor. How much detention is hurting or harmful, I think has been said by Colombia, by UNICEF already. I will not actually expand on that. This is a given. I think in the virtual room today, we have actually most of the participants having been witnesses of this plight and this harm. Many, I'm sure, have been victims of it. And I think this is also their voice we will be hearing. And this is why this type of format very much matters. But maybe most importantly, I think, as it was shown, and there are plenty of examples to that, the participants here today are also actors of change, as Laura reminded us of. And I think this is probably the more and the most important dimension. Just a few remarks here, because I think the problems are widely known now, and the standards actually applicable to children and youth in the context of immigration detention are known as well. But just a parenthesis to flag that there are many legal regimes applicable UNICEF reminded us of the UN Committee of the Child jurisprudence. But for refugees, maybe to also recall ourselves that seeking asylum is not actually a crime. Seeking asylum is meant to escape a crime. So this is a very important, of course, starting point for UNHCR, and actually refugee law itself recognizes the specific situation of asylum-seeking children and youth. You actually have a non-penalization clause in the 51 Convention, which under certain conditions actually prohibit the criminalization of irregular entry for asylum seekers and refugees. And very often when we actually assist detain refugees, that's our starting point to actually seek and litigate for their release. So I think it's also very important to recall that the state of the law includes a number of provisions which have been subscribed to but should be implemented. The same goes for the smuggling protocol, which actually contains a very clear clause about the non-criminalization of migrants for being the object of smuggling, which is very important to also rely upon for migrants and refugees. I'm sure you're all aware of how much work we've been doing advocacy-wise or in terms of operational activities. But maybe just to flag importantly that we did so very often actually in cooperation with youth and children. Two very concrete examples. One is the two multi-stakeholder pledges actually submitted at the GRF in 2023 on alternative to detention specifically and on children's rights, because of course, as we've been discussing, I'm sure detention is very often basically the main hurdle also to access many other rights, so it shouldn't be addressed in isolation. The challenges are known, as I said, the standards as well, and I think the recommendations which came out of the first global youth consultation were very telling in this regard in terms of the specific problems faced by youth, not only in being victims of detention, but in relation to the extent to which this is actually hampering access to many other rights. So I think today, and I hope we can actually hear so much from all of you in the breakout rooms, the focus should be on solutions and how actually the youth can promote and design these solutions to indeed end immigration detention of children and limit it to the greatest extent possible for adults. And in this regard, we see very important milestones. One was mentioned by Laura, the GFMD, of course, with a particular focus on legal migration. Another one will be, of course, the IMRF. And if at all possible, every effort we can take to promote pledges or commitments in these three events and making sure they are implemented, that will be actually a very concrete outcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sam. Finally, I'd like to hand over the floor to Mishka, a person with lived experience of immigration detention. Thank you, Mishka, for being here. Over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gabriela. Thanks for having me today. I'm Mishka Pillay. I'm based in the UK. I'm a member of the International Advisory Committee of International Detention Coalition, and I'm a consultant at ANM Consultancy, which is a partnership of two consultants with lived experience of the UK immigration and asylum system. So yes, I have first-hand experience of the UK immigration detention system, whereas I was detained after claiming asylum under now suspended process called Detained Fast-Track Asylum Process. I want to highlight a bit what many of us experience while in detention. The first thing that comes to my mind is the indefinite nature of detention, with no clear end. And then limited access to legal advice, almost no access to internet or mobile phones to gather evidence to support your immigration and asylum claims. And of course, a very deeply harmful environment that affected people's mental health in lasting ways. When I think about the UK's current climate towards people seeking asylum and people who migrate, the current political climate and the approach toward migration and people seeking asylum has worsened over the past years. We have had various pieces of legislation. Some were, later repealed, such as the Nationality and Borders Act, Illegal Migration Act, and then Rwanda Plan, which undermined the right to seek asylum in the first place. Immigration in general has become a quite polarized topic here. Ultimately, how I basically see the result of all these are more enforcement-based approaches, more detentions, and the expansion of detention centers instead of promoting alternatives to detention. Sadly, these issues are not limited to the UK. Across the Europe and beyond, we are seeing similar shift. A recent example I can think of is the recent EU's proposed return regulations, which would extend the detention up to 24 months, including for children, and then return hubs in third countries. All these raise serious human rights concerns. And there are also proposals for electronic monitoring like tagging, which can again replicate many of the same harms as physical detention. For me, it's very simple. This is how I see it. More detention always means more harm to people who are detained, but it's not limited to that. More harm to their families and communities as well. And I strongly believe that children and youth should not be detained. As someone with first-hand experience of detention, I know first-hand detention is harmful for anybody, but I think it's more harmful for children and young people. But there's another way. This is where I want to highlight the importance of alternatives to detention. I'm talking about community-based models grounded in support and trust rather than control or enforcement, which could ensure people engage with the immigration systems while also protecting their rights. These alternatives are more human and cost-effective as well. So if you are serious about human rights, then ATDs or alternatives must not only exist, but must be prioritized. They should not be limited to pilot projects as well. I want to share some recommendations as well before I finish. And these recommendations are based on my personal experience of detention, my role as an International Advisory Committee member of the International Detention Coalition, and finally, my passion around lived experience leadership, which is also one of the main overarching focuses of my consultative partnership and Mishka consultancy. While our goal is to end detention, the reality is detention currently exists, and sadly it will exist for some time. This is how I see it. So these recommendations are addressed to different stakeholders, since we all need to play a role within our capacities, supporting people with lived experience of detention while they are working to end detention and promote alternatives as the ultimate goal. First, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of meaningful involvement of youth with lived experience. Youth who have experienced immigration detention must actively involve in designing, implementing, and evaluating campaigns to end detention, and also while promoting alternatives to detention. I know that there are issues regarding leadership opportunities, fair compensation, the list goes on. That's why meaningful involvement of youth includes providing them with leadership opportunities, fair compensation, safe platform for their voices to shape policy and practice. It's disheartening to see that there is a growing trend in states in Europe and of course beyond, increasingly focusing on enforcement-based approaches and immigration detention. We all know the negative impacts of detention. We already have enough evidence of that, so I will not talk about that much. That's why all the states must shift their resources from detention into community-supported alternatives that prioritize case resolution with proper legal support, housing, and promote well-being, especially for young people, children, and families. This is why it's important to invest in community-based alternatives to detention. It's positive to see growing interest from funders and supporting grassroots organizations and initiatives, but I believe more work needs to be done in this area, and that policymakers and funders need to support more youth-led partnerships and community-based organizations to co-create advocacy, policy, and service delivery that promote a human migration governance system with an emphasis on alternatives to detention. This is why collaborative advocacy with by and for organization is crucial in my view. Finally, end the use of immigration detention for children, young people, and families for the good. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mishka, for sharing your story and your advocacy with us. This is deeply appreciated. So everyone, with that in mind, we are now going to head into the regional breakout rooms for focused discussions around 4 different questions. The breakout sessions are held under Chatham House rules for the safety of all participating. We really encourage you to participate as much as you feel comfortable, and those wishing to observe only can float between breakout rooms. And if you'd like to participate, you may, but please do so only in one room if you're observer. So the breakout room consultation will last for 1 hour and will be moderated by regional facilitators. Thank you and see you soon.
Hi everyone. If anyone would like to go to a specific breakout room, please let me know, and if they can't, select it.
Okay, so people are joining, and yeah. Maybe wait for 1 or 2 more minutes and then. Okay, I think, yeah. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. I am Tatiana, and I'll be the moderator for the final part of today's consultation. We hope you enjoyed the consultations, and thank you for sharing your perspectives. Now we'll hear from the rapporteurs of each room to hear about the different perspectives from around the world. I'd first like to invite the rapporteur for Africa breakout room to take us through the discussions in your room.
Thank you very much. We had an incredibly vibrant discussion in the Africa session, so I will do my very best to report it back. I may need some other people to come in and help me because so many people spoke and so many people put things in the chat. First of all, as a kind of general point, people talked about the high percentage of children among migrants and refugees in Africa, often due to conflicts, violence, climate change impacts, and also people seeking out economic opportunities. And other concerns are weak legal frameworks and lack of adherence to some international norms. So that was some of the, and a big issue that was raised by a lot of people was lack of good data on detention and lack of disaggregated data. And a concern about that also impacting weak institutional frameworks. But we had many positive points talked about. One example was the recent Kampala Declaration on Migration, Environment and Climate Change, which is a rights-based declaration, not specifically about detention or children, but this is the sort of rights-based framework that's important in the region. We also heard about some of the more criminal detention restorative justice programs, diversionary programs for children being detained for criminal reasons, where we could get some inspiration for other forms of alternative to detention in migration settings. Other examples we heard about were in the Democratic Republic of Congo, youth committees of refugees and asylum seekers, and the importance of being engaged in those youth committees, and the importance of helping people in those youth committees with issues such as entrepreneurship so that people can support themselves. Other issues raised were about people with disabilities and the lack of programs for migrants with disabilities, or lack of sufficient programs. There were some mentioned. There was also concern expressed, I think this was from Kenya, about parents sometimes being arrested and detained, leaving children without caretakers, and also the trend of climate-induced migration resulting in many children on the move. However, there was also a note that in Kenya, there was some improvements on child protection practices and the importance that many states in the region have ratified relevant conventions. A concern was expressed, I'm sorry, going from concerns to positives, but a concern was expressed about lack of proper age assessment mechanisms. But again, also noting on the positive side that despite some of the concerns, when compared to some countries that are externalizing their border management, Africa is doing relatively well in not detaining children compared to some regions of the world. On the question of what should we be doing, there was a focus on the importance of research and advocacy, and there were examples in West Africa of that leading to more child protection-based policies, and the need to be focused on community-based placements rather than detention, and we saw examples of that in Uganda. and the need to be pushing for youth on the move to have access to education, health, and healthcare, psychosocial assistance, and child-friendly legal aid. And an example of many of these services being provided was in transit centres in Ethiopia. Also the need for regional coordination in border management, strengthening cross-border child protection frameworks, for example, for family tracing and family reunification, and the need for government, civil society to have partnerships, and particularly important for that to include local organisations that are grassroots-led. And the need to include children and adolescents safely in decision-making processes, including in designing services and monitoring and evaluating alternatives to detention. A lot of talk about advocacy, the need for advocacy with policymakers and service providers to adopt alternatives to detention, and the need to promote awareness and on the laws, to do work with law enforcement agencies and with government representatives generally on child protection and on alternatives to detention. And then, and also focusing on case management, community-based programs, open reception centres, and that cross-border collaboration. Also a focus where children have been detained. We need psychosocial support to reintegrate those children after detention because of the experiences they've had in detention, the need to invest more in child welfare systems. And then on those last questions about what can youth organizations and what can youth do, there was a lot of talk about how youth can conduct research on the reality for people in youth in detention and use that research to advocate for policy change. The point that youth-led organizations are more grassroots, so they can have a much better impact than many of those organizations that are further from the ground. Someone talked about radio programs they had done, where radio programs really reach people, but also digital campaigns and storytelling, and also youth being involved in mentorship for youth on the move. Someone asked if we could mobilize for a regional campaign towards ending child immigration detention in Africa, but the organizations are going to need funding and capacity building to be able to do the best work. Youth can also share stories and experiences, and someone mentioned how young people with disabilities how they could transform the narrative when they're given the opportunity to be able to speak. And someone asked about African-based base camps to discuss migration issues for youth. And just lastly, just the importance of informing children of their rights, whether through social media or other networks. I hope I captured it. Oh, there was so much.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Now over to the Latin America, the Caribbean rapporteur.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you everyone who participated and engaged in the discussion in the Latin America breakout room. It was also a very fruitful discussion. What was made clear is that in Latin America, we have many challenges and at the same time, some of the best practices observed worldwide. And so challenges observed in the region include the current geopolitical context with the change of the US administration that has been leading to new challenges, such as the growing number of returnees in the routes, as well as some bilateral agreements that have led to individuals being detained, deported, and to other violations of their rights. Other challenges also mentioned were gaps between policy and practice, as well as lack of access of migrants and refugees to healthcare, to food in detention, and also during their whole journey throughout throughout immigration system and the process that they undergo. In terms of promising practices, it has also been made clear that the best practice is non-detention. So this was everybody was very stringent on this point. And still, some best practices were shared in terms of developing sponsor agreements and investing in open door accommodation and community living options rather than implementing closed door centers, and of course, detention. Other good practices mentioned also referred to collaboration between civil society and the authorities, both in terms of allowing for CSOs to monitor child protection programs being implemented, and also in terms of actively contributing to the design of these HED programs. Now about the role of youth in ending child immigration detention, we heard about the importance of listening to youth and to children and those with lived experience in general, and fostering peer exchanges, including with the authorities. Moreover, participants mentioned how important it is to gather data, document cases, and especially how essential it is to access these isolated areas and to reach those that are usually not reached and not heard. So to make sure that everybody's experience and that we have all of the information possible for the future design and development of ATD, for services and for policies, especially towards the end of child immigration detention. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Luisa. Inviting the Europe North America rapporteur to speak.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you very much to all those who joined the session on North America and Europe, and also who contributed in the chat and orally sharing their views. So we discussed the first two questions and then the second two. And let me share some highlights from what participants indicated. So the first, in terms of trends and challenges, what was interesting was that some participants highlighted that although in the law in countries, for example, in the US, but also in others, there are strict limitations to the detention of children, then the application of this law in practice that is not happening. And very often the issues may relate to the lack of resources and capacity for childcare arrangements or the lack of a sufficient number of sponsors. It was also highlighted by another participant where there's been a legal reform, and so there's an actual prohibition of the detention of children for immigration reasons, yet the process to implement that law and develop accordingly the regulations, the practices, and the system to avoid the detention of children takes quite some time. And it was highlighted that in that process is particularly important to include migrant and refugee children. This can contribute also to accelerate the process of implementation. So, for example, it was shared that involving creating a safe space for children to share their experience and involving them into articulating what was the impact for them of child immigration detention was quite important in mobilizing the local authorities and engaging them more speedily in the reform process. In terms of challenges, and other participants also underlined that this issue of child immigration detention does not get enough attention, is not a reality which is known to the public at large, and this is quite a critical aspect, because we need a commitment, mobilization from the society, and if people are informed, that they are more ready to engage and to support reforms, and this was observed in some countries. The other reality, which is not known, is also that sometimes the children are, despite the law, may be kept in closed shelters or in closed centers at the airport or in other places. So basically,
Sorry, could I ask everyone to please go on?
Thank you. A radical choice. Sorry for the interruption. I was saying that there are realities where children, and they were reported, for example, in Portugal, where children have been kept in detention in centers at the airport beyond what was the maximum time limit foreseen. And it was very much stressed that even a very short stay of 1 day or 2 days, as we heard also earlier in the plenary, of detention has a tremendous negative and harmful impact on the child. And there was really a strong call for making these issues better known and better recognized by the public. And other participants also highlighted not only highlighted further these practices of de facto detention and the risks of re-victimizing children by referring them to childcare arrangements, which are closed door accommodations, so which are de facto places where children cannot leave the place freely, and that are really detention. And this is a big challenge to tackle. It was also interesting in terms of how to promote alternatives and what we could do differently. There is a video which participants, I think, will receive. We can share the link. It was shared in the chat. It was observed that, for example, in having a large campaign in Belgium that led to changes in law, it was quite instrumental to have video testimonies of children articulating and telling their experience. And so this is this was very, very important in changing the law, but then in practice, not always the referral to the care arrangements are referrals to places which are really childcare institutions. Some of these places continue to resemble places of detention. I think I mentioned that involving the children in the discussion with the local authorities was also seen as instrumental and very, very positive in favoring the reform process at the local level and in putting in place the procedures, but also the system for avoiding the detention of children. In terms of young people and their involvement, I think it was interesting that one of the participants shared their work in trying to involve children in different countries and also bringing them together, and but also creating a safe space with the help of psychologists, social workers, in order to help them articulate their experiences, avoiding any additional harm, but also creating this more as an empowering opportunities. And there was an interesting example, for example, of letting young people just, make their own video and their own testimony of their what happened to them and how they lived through this issue. I think also bringing them together through different countries was also highlighted as something quite helpful. I would stop here and thank again everyone. If I missed something, please jump in or post something in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liliana. Last but not least, the rapporteur for Asia and the Pacific.
Thank you, and thanks to the participants of the Asia and Pacific session. We had a wonderful discussion and contribution from many different people. In terms of challenges, we discussed that public awareness is a key issue, that many of the public don't understand or don't actually know what is happening, and that as a result, the government is not putting effort into addressing child immigration detention. We also discussed that many people and many children who experience detention don't have access to education and other opportunities. We heard from participants with lived experience around this, and not having access to employment or to education. We also discussed that children from minority ethnic groups get disproportionately affected due to policies concerning child immigration detention, and this is a big challenge, particularly in Asia. In terms of promoting alternatives to detention and what they look like, we had a range of initiatives that were shared, including alternatives alternatives to detention pilot programs, particularly around keeping families together, keeping children and mothers in shelters, daycare, neonatal services, and early nutrition programs that ensures that young children and their mothers are kept together. We also looked at areas where presidential decrees had prevented detaining children, although there was some concern around changes in government and whether certain decrees would be repealed or reversed. We also discussed community alternatives and community spaces, integrating education and healthcare services, and discussing programs where that has been the case. In terms of what youth organizations in this region are doing and the role that they can play in addressing child immigration detention, we discussed that youth organizations are vital in advocating to the government, bringing in youth and children voices, and that we saw some examples, for example, in Thailand, where this has been the case, where the government has been open to the voices of children and youth, and that has had some impact in shifting mindsets. We also looked at organizations that provide shelter and support in hosting displaced people, since they are often impacted by these issues. We spoke about mental and physical health needs that need to be assessed, and potentially having organizations that have a youth focus filling this role. We also discussed family integration being very important and can be facilitated by organizations that are working with young people, as well as reintegration in the educational system. We discussed empowerment as well as an important tool so that we can integrate and make decisions as young people. We discussed in terms of the role that young people themselves can play. We also spoke about social media and social media campaigns that can have a great effect on raising awareness, disseminating information, raising petitions regarding ending child immigration detention, and also turning public discourses from lived experience to make it clear what the conditions of detention are, and recognizing storytelling as a powerful tool on these issues. We spoke around children being able to advocate for educational changes, as well as young people advocating for community-based alternatives such as living in communities and shared houses. I think I've represented everything, hopefully. Thank you, and I'll pass back to Tatiana. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. And that brings us to the end of the plenary session. Heading straight into our closing, I'd now like to hand over the floor to Carolina Gottardo from the International Detention Coalition.
Thank you so much. Firstly to say that it is fantastic to hear about all these discussions in the different breakout groups, and especially all these ideas about how are we going to work together, and the importance of the role of youth in kind of spearheading this movement to end child immigration detention, which is very inspiring. In my closure, I just want to highlight some of I just want to bring kind of dots together of what we have been doing, and I mean, and some of what has been already shared and said, and I mean, taking on, I mean, youth voices, and specifically the youth voices of those affected by immigration detention are absolutely essential with regards to ending child immigration detention. And I want to take on the point that Laura made before, saying immigration detention is simply not an option. There is no humane way to detain a child. Personally, I personally think that immigration detention is one of the biggest human rights breaches of our time. I mean, when you think about the impact of it, and we have talked about it, and when we think the reason for it is just, it is one of the biggest human rights issues of our time, and therefore we need to be active together in terms of how to work towards ending this, and specifically looking at the effects that we have heard so much about. So I think Mishka also said this: more detention means more harm. And I think this is a very important quote because the detention is associated with harm. And the thing is that it doesn't have to be this way. And this is why alternatives to detention is such an important part of what we're talking about, because not only detention is extremely harmful and has devastating effects for people, families, and communities as a whole and for generations, but it's actually not effective. Immigration detention is not an effective way of migration control. And there is so much research coming from different places showing this. It doesn't have to be this way. On the top of that, we also know that immigration detention is super costly. And we know that alternatives to detention that are right-centered and that are community-based and that are real alternatives to detention that promote case resolution are good for migrants and also could be good for governments. I mean, they are effective and they are a fraction of the cost of immigration detention, and they are more than anything rights protecting. People's freedom doesn't need to be affected. And it doesn't have to be this way because precisely there are these alternatives. So we can spare these efforts to end immigration detention, and it's something that needs collective effort. Just finishing as a work stream of the UN Migration Network on alternatives that we are co-facilitating with UNHCR and UNICEF, and our colleagues have spoken before. We are delighted to have been working with MYCP on this very important youth consultation. And I mean, as part of some of the future work of our work stream, we're going to be very focused on working towards specific pledges at the IMRF towards advancing this agenda, ending child immigration detention, promoting alternatives to detention. There have been already so many pledges, and Laura spoke about this before, both at the IMRF and at the Global Refugee Forum, advancing this agenda. We need to consolidate this more so in a time where it's so critical because we're seeing the geopolitical movements that we're witnessing right now. We really need to advance this, and we need to advance it strongly as a movement. So we are going to be working on these pledges. We also have a number of upcoming events. So we are going to be involved in an event with the European Migration Network, looking at the situation in Europe, which is precarious in different ways. We are also co-organizing a side event at the GFMD, at the Global Forum on Migration and Development, on this issue of alternatives.
Unfortunately, I cannot hear you, Carolina.
You can hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, you have been very loud and clear.
Okay, I thought you were losing me. I'm sorry. Okay, so I was just mentioning some of the activities that we're planning. So the GFMD side event that hopefully will have some states sponsoring, hopefully including Colombia, and a satellite event on working to end child detention in Europe as part of the World Congress of Justice with Children with MYCP, and also the side event. I mean, I just, in terms of this is what the group is going to be doing, and it's going to be very focused in its advocacy. With regards to IDC, we will continue targeted advocacy at the national, regional, and global level, and uniting kind of these fronts. And we will continue with efforts also on peer learning and cross-regional peer learning. Laura spoke about the Zimbabwe example, where there was exchange with governments with different regions. We are actually planning more of this for this year, and we have just finalized our peer learning in Asia Pacific that went very well with 5 different governments, and so we will continue elaborating on that, and we will continue the work with movement building and with members. And this work is super important because, as I say, we need to ensure that the voices of people with lived experience are there, that they are front and center, that youth is part of this, and that we are all part of this movement in terms of ending detention. Just to finish, you will see some research coming from us. We will have a policy brief on detention, alternatives, and gender that we are finalizing with UN Women. And we are also finalizing global research on a very important topic, which is digital technologies, detention, and alternatives to detention. And the issue that alternatives to detention cannot be alternative forms of detention, and digital detention is not an option. And it's important to highlight this space. So there will be research from us. I finished here, but just thank you for your active participation and engagement. I always get very inspired working with young people, and I just invite you to raise your voices and to all work in this change towards ending detention. So I'll pass it on to Aryan, and yeah, thank you everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Carolina. And for IDC's continued support on accelerating action to end immigrant detention. Finally, I'd like to hand over my colleague, Aryan Sanghrajka, Global Focal Point for Migration and at MYCP, to end the consultation today.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for attending today's Global Youth Consultation. Your thoughts, perspectives, action-oriented solutions are truly inspiring change as we work to ensure that the lives, welfare, and rights of children and refugees on the move are free of fear of detention. We've all realized that the global picture on immigration detention is sobering, with some excellent good practices coming from Colombia. One of the strongest quotes I've heard from one of MYCP's network's members on with lived experience is, "I might have left detention, but detention has not left me." And we all know the effect and experience of immigration detention goes beyond the time spent in a detention center. But we came together today in so many people from around the world to discuss ways forward. And I'd like to particularly pay tribute to all the young people with lived experience who were courageous in sharing their stories today. Your reality not only enriched our discussions, but inspired us for future action. So thank you. And as we've heard, young people are already leading the charge in grassroots change. In every region of the world, your efforts are making tangible differences to the rights of migrants and refugees, and everyone here would have heard clear your call for support. As your global platform, MYCP are joining you in these efforts. As such, alternatives to detention has been voted by our international constituency as a global priority for the upcoming International Migration Review Forum, and we're proud to be strengthening our partnerships on the issue. And as co-chair of Roundtable 2 of this year's GFMD, we look forward to discussing ATD and innovations of community-based alternatives further in Riohacha. In that light, we look forward to the side event that Carolina just mentioned at the 5th World Congress on Justice for Children, and the outcomes from today's consultation will be shared there, so we invite you all to attend virtually or in person in Madrid. MYCP will also be publishing our GCM youth policy briefs from every region of the world and our consultations with hundreds of grassroots network members, and the Global Youth Report on the State of Migration, which will have a specific chapter on alternatives to detention. Today's consultation is just the start of a long road ahead of us in achieving GCM Objective 13 and GCR Paragraph 60. Through pledges, partnerships, and mobilization, we can accelerate our action here today. Across stakeholder groups, together, hand in hand, with governments, the private sector, civil society, and young people, we have heard the stories about the effects of immigration detention, how we can play our part in ensuring that migrants and refugees are treated with fairness, dignity, respect, and compassion, and a brighter future is possible, and we can create it together. So I'd finally like to end by saying thank you first and foremost to Melanie, Carolina, and Sam for your partnership and work on today's consultation, and especially to Laura and Mishka for coming to speak to us today, as well as the entire support team who made this possible. Lastly, thank you to everyone who participated and observed, and I hope you take the messages and learnings from today's consultation and turn it into action. Let's keep the conversation going with an open and inclusive dialogue to achieve our global objective. Thank you very much. And on behalf of MYCP, we continue to be your voice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aryan. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, oh, it's a question, I think, here, yes. Abigail.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry, I didn't really get a chance to say anything in the breakout rooms. The time zones are really different, so I was kind of getting ready for work, so I didn't really get the chance to participate. But I had an idea of like a way that we can, you know, kind of embark on this initiative. I'm not sure if it has been done already. It may have, because I know that organizations like UNICEF are, you know, very big and have really great, bright ideas. So it may have been done before, but I was thinking something in the line of petitions. I have experienced how powerful petitions can be. So maybe if we can have like youth-led petitions in specifically these regions that are still detaining, young people or children, that would be a great start. It might have a really significant impact on these regions so that they can understand how much this is affecting, young people, right? So that could be a great way. But if it has been done already, I am interested in like how did that go? What was the outcome of that?
Thank you, Abigail. Thanks for that. Please do get in contact with us. I put the email in the chat, and we can definitely take that further with you as well. Tatiana, back to you. If not, then thank you so much, everyone, for coming to today's consultation. We really appreciate it. There will be many more events and activities and workshops for everyone to attend in the future. Let's keep the momentum going, but thank you so much for today. And we look forward to seeing you, hopefully, at our next event in Madrid.
Thank you very much.